Well, hello. I'm glad you could join us. I will say good evening just because for those who watch us live in the United States, it's evening. So uh, nice to have you here with us. I see a couple of notifications already. Let me take a quick peek at those. All right, so we are getting started here. And I think that means my wife would like to join in. So let's put her on speaker there. Hello? You there?
Hi.
Okay. Good evening. Renee has been sick today, and I had a brief run in with not feeling well on Wednesday. We had an appointment on Monday, and we think maybe we picked up something there. So we both had to do a little recovering. Hasn't been really bad, but at least it wasn't for me. How was it for you?
Pretty awful.
Are you over it, or are you still messed up?
No, I'm a lot better, but I'm not over it yet.
Yeah. Well, I was able to kind of sleep mine off, but
That helps. I'm hungry, but well, let's just say I'm getting my appetite back.
yeah,
I'm not really keen on eating anything.
yeah.
Not after the way my belly felt this morning.
Well, that's kind of the thing. You feel like you need to eat, but the thought of eating kind of yeah,
Well, I was throwing up, so
yeah. Well, I
I,
wasn't going to mention that, but
yeah.
so that's kind of been our week here. They did finally get to digging up in our yard. I thought because they had painted around my water meter that they were doing something with the water company. But then when they dug up the yard, they dug up not our water line, but our gas line. What marking our water meter was just so they'd know where to avoid things. And so I've talked to some of the guys who were doing the work. They're contracted by the gas company to redo gas mains in the area. So
They just dug up our yard a couple of years ago.
yeah, well, they did our yard a couple of years ago because there was a leak in the line leading to our house between the gas main and our meter. So they were losing gas uh, going toward our house, but it wasn't going through our meter, so we weren't paying for it. And when I talked to the guys who did that, I told them, well, the part of the yard you dug out, the grass hadn't been growing there anyway. And he said, well, that's probably because there's been a gas leak there, so the gas has been killing any lawn that might grow there.
Okay.
This is you may have seen this. There are companies that have these machines. They can actually do what they call directional drilling, so they can start driving a hole in the ground, and then they can make that hole turn and go under something, and then come back up on the other side. So this company does that kind of thing amongst other things, and they had one of those machines out. It was across the street the other day. I could see it. So far they haven't interrupted our gas service. I don't know if they're going to do that at some point or not. But I mentioned to one of them that my uncle worked for a gas company in Michigan pretty much all his life. So
If you like, I can give you a few recipes that will turn you into a gas factory.
yeah, well, yeah. If you saw our sermon presentation last Saturday, then you'll know that I was working with my streaming software a little bit and was able to get it to do some things that should have been pretty obvious to me, but at any rate, I got it figured out. So let me maximize this here. Where did I do that over here? There we go. So I can go to this scene here, and you can see this is the setup that I normally use for the sermon presentation because of that narrow window. And what I thought of doing finally was actually the presentations we do are 3:4 aspect ratio while we're streaming in 16:9 aspect ratio. So I was able to push the slides off to the side of the screen and make my camera section there larger so that you could see a larger picture of me and the entire screen without my picture covering up the edges of it. So I was able to do that. What I was not able to do was to switch seamlessly from one scene to the other. And that's because I had to deactivate one in order to activate the other. And since I had figured that out, I decided to do a Google search and see if I could find a way to get the camera to show up in all the different scenes and not have to deactivate it in one and then activate it in the other. Well, as you can see, I've done that. And the first thing that I read was the person was asking, can I use the same source in multiple scenes? And the person who responded to it said, yeah, not a problem. Just make sure that you click Add Existing and add the existing source. And you can have the same source then in multiple scenes, and whichever scene you click in, say be it here, or here, or here, the camera shows up and is working, and you just make that very seamless transition. So that was kind of handy and nice to be able to do. But the problem that I was having about having to disable or deactivate the camera in one scene in order to activate it in another, I would like to be able to do that. So I kept reading, and somebody said that very thing. Well, I've done some put some filters on my camera for a particular scene, but if I do that, then it adds those filters to all instances of it if I add existing, and I don't want that. And he said, well, what you need to do is you need to put that source in a group and then apply the filter to the group instead of to the source itself. And that way the source works in all scenes, and in the scene where you want it to have a filter, and the example here would be this, that's a filter, because what I've done is I've trimmed the edges of the scene so that only the center of the scene shows up. And I can switch now from that to this or this entirely seamlessly, and the camera's available in all of them because I haven't affected the camera source itself. I've just affected the group that has the camera source in it. So that was a handy, neat little thing to learn. I learned it last week, and I do plan to use that tonight in our as we get through our Bible study. So that was kind of an interesting thing. You can, if you're able to word your questions properly, you can learn a whole lot of interesting things with web searches. So, anything else before we get started tonight?
Yeah, but I'm not in the mood to talk. So
Okay, well.
enjoy the evening without me.
Well, okay. So We apologize for last week. We kind of lost track of time, and our study ended up going just over 2 hours to finish Genesis chapter 4. We hadn't intended that. Some of that time got wasted with our work on the Hallel pony, Hazelel pony, wasn't it?
Hello, Bunny.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll keep a better eye on the clock this week, and we'll stop when we're supposed to instead of running over like that. So to get started, let's bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, we thank you that we have an opportunity each week and to study the Word, and that you have enabled us to make it to that time this week. And we thank you for that. We thank you that we are here to do these things. And we thank you that you have provided the Word as a means for us to come to know you. That's what we want to do as we open the Word this evening. We want to know you better. We want to trust you more explicitly. And we want to be able to reflect the image that you originally placed in us at creation more fully through this study. And we know that for that to happen, we need the Holy Spirit. So we request that the Holy Spirit will draw close to each person who listens, either now or later when they view the recorded version, and that the Spirit will give them exactly what they need. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So this is the setup that we generally use on Friday night, because it is the nature of Bible Gateway, which is the website that we use to display the Bible text, that we can do that. We've got that edge over there that we can cover up, and it doesn't really affect the text of the Bible that we read.
You know who's in there talking to people?
Are you talking to a kitty?
Yeah, she's usually in there harassing you.
Yeah, she'll figure it out, unless she's too lazy to paw the door open.
Oh, the door's open.
Well, it's a little bit, but it'd be kind of tight squeeze for a cat to fit through. But this is a, hello?
Not this cat, she's a bone.
Well, yeah. This is the cat that can get into the floor level kitchen cupboards if she wants to. So that door shouldn't pose much of a barrier to her if she wants to get through it.
No, the door's open enough for her.
Yeah.
And unusual for her to be in here when you're doing what you're doing right now.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, she's gone. She was up on the back of my chair.
Yeah. Yeah, both cats like to sit and even sleep on the back of the chair above her head, so they kind of serve as her crown. So Genesis 5, and I noticed something reading this week that just never quite had dawned on me in all the humpty gazillion times I've read this chapter in the past. And that is, it starts out as if it is another account of creation. That'd make it the third account. So what it says is, this is the written account of the descendants of Adam. When God created human beings, he made them to be like himself. And more literal versions say that he made them in his image. Yeah, turn to page too far, looking for something there. Well, okay, it says, he made him in the likeness of God. That's the New American Standard Bible. We'll look it up real quickly in the King James, just for the fun of it. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Okay, so it doesn't use the terminology of Genesis chapter 1, which talks about the image, but it does talk about the likeness, which is essentially the same thing.
If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. The Father and I are the same.
Mm-hmm.
But we understand that they're two separate individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus died, and at the moment he died, his father, well, there was thunder,
Mm-hmm.
which I believe was his father crying out in agony over the loss of his son.
Mm-hmm.
So, if Jesus claimed to be the same as the Father, that he and the Father were the same, then he created, I would take it to mean that he created humans to be in his image, just like he was in the Father's image.
Mm-hmm.
That's not physical appearance.
Although it might also be that.
It might be.
So there's a footnote there. We've already passed over that footnote A. Man. The Hebrew reads Adam or Adam, similar in 5 verse 2. So, yeah. He created them male and female, and he blessed them, and he called them, and they put human here in quotes, but that again would be the Hebrew Adam or Adam. So, humanity. Man, if you wish.
Man is a neuter gender.
And the other thing that's fascinating in these two verses is that we see a repeat of what we ran across there in chapter 1, when it said he made them in the image of God, male and female created he them. So here we have that thing. He made them to be like himself. He created them male and female, and he blessed them and called them. Well, we like to use the term human or Homo sapiens. Anyway.
And yet, as we pointed out earlier, it was Adam that delegated Eve the role of being on the level of an animal.
When he named her, right.
Yeah.
And we suggested that may be what was going on when it talks about in the time of one of Cain's sons that people began to worship God by name or to call on the name of the Lord. No, okay, it's right there at the end of chapter 4, kind of what we ended with last week. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos, and then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. And the version we have here actually said to worship God by name, suggesting that at some point humanity began to think of God kind of the same way that Adam began to think of his wife after they had believed the serpent's lies. So now we get into a section here that could be a little bit dry and boring because it's just talking about years and genealogy. So verse 3, when Adam was 130 years old, he became the father of a son who was just like him in his very image. He named his son Seth. After the birth of Seth, Adam lived another 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Adam lived 930 years, and then he died. Now, it's kind of hard to say for sure, because sometimes in storytelling you take events out of order in order to focus on a particular thread and then go back and pick up a different thread and focus on it. So Genesis 4 made it sound like all the stuff with Cain and Abel happened before Seth was even born. Now, of course, we know, or we believe anyway, that the man and the woman were created as full-grown adults and were likely capable of procreation right from the day they came into being, unlike some of the others who would have to have matured and grown up.
Oh, please. They were healthy, they were naked, and they had no instructions to leave each other alone, so
Yeah.
thanks for the image.
Well, the point I'm getting to here is that even if Seth were born after all the business with Cain and Abel, did Adam and Eve quit having children after those until Seth was born? Or did they continue having children so that Cain and Abel had a whole handful of brothers and sisters by the time that part of the story takes place? And then Seth either was the third born son and was alive when these things happen, and the narrators just back up to tell about him, or he was not the third born son, most likely, because verse 25 in chapter 4, and since I've got the King James open here, I'll read out of it. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, said she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. So if she gave him that name and specifically referenced the death of Abel, then that makes sense that Seth was born after that. So Adam had older sons, most likely, than Seth, if we can believe that part of the story. And yet Seth is the one through whom his lineage is counted. And I'm going to guess that's probably true as we go through this whole thing. We're not looking necessarily at firstborn sons. We're just looking at a particular trace of the lineage. So when it says somebody waited X number of years before they had a son, doesn't mean they waited that long. It just means that's how old they were when the son that we're going to count was born. So, again, assuming that Seth was born after the events with Cain and Abel, which it seems to be the case, then Adam being 130 years old, who knows what age he was when these other sons were born, and therefore, they could have been upwards of 100 years old when the incident between Cain and Abel took place. At any rate, this makes a point that the son Seth was just like the man in his very image. He named his son Seth, and it doesn't say here why he got that name, just that he got that name. After the birth of Seth, Adam lived another 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Adam lived 930 years, and then he died. The other thing that we can't tell for certain about this is at what point does this genealogy start counting Adam's age? Is it counting from creation? Is it counting from the event at the tree involving the serpent? And we've discussed before, we don't really know how long it was then, although it seems likely, given the presence of forces on the planet when God came to prepare it for humanity, that it wasn't very long before the serpent came and asserted his presence and tried to take over. So we've got the total of 930 years for the man, and then he died. When Seth was 105 years old, he became the father of Enosh. And there's a footnote B there. We'll look at that. Ancestor of. In other words, the Hebrew isn't explicit, and so we may or may not be naming exact sons. We may be naming grandsons or great-grandsons in some cases. It's just this is the one that we next mention in the genealogy. Now that might then call into question the exact lengths of time given, but we're going to assume for our purposes here that the lengths of time are relatively accurate and that they can be pasted together. And we're going to get to a point where you'll see why we think that may well be the case. So we have Enosh, the grandson of the man. After the birth of Enosh, Seth lived 807 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Seth lived 912 years, and then he died. And footnote C says, or the birth of this ancestor of. Okay, all right. And again, throughout this narrative, we'll have that same thing taking place. When Enosh was 90 years old, he became the father of Kenan. After the birth of Kenan, Enosh lived another 815 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Enosh lived 905 years, and then he died. When Kenan was 70 years old, he became the father of Mahalalel. After the birth of Mahalalel, Kenan lived another 840 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Kenan lived 910 years, and then he died. Now, up until this point, we've kind of had a progression. Adam 930, Seth 912, Enosh 905. But then Kenan, he lives 910, so he kind of breaks the mold there. Now, the other thing that's going on is the age at the birth of the next mentioned descendant. So Adam 130, Seth 105, Enosh 90, Kenan 70. And now Mahalalel, he gives birth to his son when he's just 65. When Mahalalel was 65 years old, he became the father of Jared. After the birth of Jared, Mahalalel lived another 830 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Mahalalel lived 895 years, and then he died. So here's another one whose life was even shorter. The shortest so far.
Just hang on there just a second. Spell that name, Mahalalel.
Mahalaalel.
Okay. I don't know about the language that is, But I know when I took medical terminology that when you're working with medical terminology, the you take the last syllable and swap it around and put it on the beginning of the word. As in, let's see, neurologist. You would go with the ist and bring it to the front. Ist would mean study of, or neurology. The G would be study of the neuro system. So if can we place that kind of way of interpreting the name Mahalalel and think that the name might have something to do with Eld?
Maybe. Could be.
Not that it would mean anything, it just kind of struck me there.
Yeah. When Jared was 162 years old, now here's a break, and he had other sons and daughters. Jared lived 962 years, and then he died. When Enoch was 65 years old, same as Mahalalel, he became the father of Methuselah. After the birth of Methuselah, Enoch lived in close fellowship with God for another 300 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Enoch lived 365 years, walking in close fellowship with God. Then one day he disappeared because God took him. Now that's pretty interpretive. If we read that in the New American Standard Bible, which is a little less interpretive, it says, and Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. Then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him.
Wait a minute. Remember the story of the little girl that went to her mother's funeral, and it messed her up because the preacher looked at the child and said, God took your mommy to be with him. The wording of that, by our terminology, would indicate that God killed the person.
I was thinking the same thing. We very often use that terminology, God took them.
Yeah. We need to be careful what we say about God.
Well, and yeah, I don't know if you were going to get that far, but as I recall the story, it leaves the girl wondering, God's kind of selfish. He thinks he needs her more than I do. I need my mommy.
Yeah. And even more than that, let's get off of that story and go back to the original story, the original lie. You shall not surely die. What's happening there? They're all dying.
Yeah.
He lived so many years and then he died.
Yeah.
Well, why is he dying if you're not really dying? Yet, aren't there religions out there that teach that you don't really die, your soul goes off to heaven where you...
Well, one very common feature of world religions, including Christianity, is the belief that the death we experience is just a passage from one life stage to another. In other words, you're no longer here on this earth. We can't talk to you. Your body decays, but your soul, your being, lives on and goes on and does something else, transitions to another phase of life. And that has become the realm of religion, because for many people, religion is mired in mysticism and unreality. And so, we link religion then to the worship of God, and our worship of God becomes unreal, and our God becomes unreal because we've gotten caught up in mysticism. And you kind of, if you're going to believe that death is just a transition from one phase of life to another, you really kind of have to get involved in mysticism, because there is no reality-based evidence that anything of the sort occurs. The reality-based evidence is that when you die, you're dead, you're gone, that's it, ain't coming back. That's the reality-based evidence of what's going on. Now, you can have a view of death that allows for God to engage in the act of resurrection, which can be real because God does have the power to create, and that allows us to live again after death. And you don't have to believe in any form of mysticism for that to be the case. That can be fully compatible with everything we know about reality. So in this group, we think that view of God working in concert with the laws of the universe as he created them is more rational and sensible than the mystical views that so many people in this world want to believe in because it makes them feel good. Now, the normal interpretation of the story of Enoch is that somehow he engaged in a much more intimate relationship with God than any of the people around him in the world at that time. And as a result of that, God chose to take him to heaven without him passing through the portals of death. And Enoch is the only one of all the people we're going to read about here in this chapter that it doesn't say, and then he died. It just says he was not, or he disappeared, because God took him. Now, there are some other interpretations of the story of Enoch that hold, what Enoch did during his life. But those are all speculation, because all we've got from the Bible is this, and then the book of Enoch, which appears to be something that was some Hebrew religious literature developed later. We don't have it as part of the biblical canon, although one of the New Testament writers, Jude, does quote from it, and mentions Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, said whatever it was. But even if we accept that that was in fact written by this Enoch here, we still haven't got very much to go on in what his life was like. He lived on this planet. He had children. He was here for 365 years and vanished. Now we read on. When Methuselah was 187 years old, and I think that may be the longest of any of them, let's see, 162. Before that was the longest. So 187 years. That's the longest between the birth of one and the birth of the next person in the genealogy. He became the father of Lamech. After the birth of Lamech, Methuselah lived another 782 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Methuselah lived 969 years, and then he died. Now, that 969 is the longest age given in this passage, and indeed the longest age given of any person in the Bible. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that he lived longer than anybody else. He's just the longest lives of the ones who are named and whose ages are given. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. We don't know. At any rate, 969 years, that's 7 years more than his predecessor. I think it was Jared. Yeah, Jared lived 962, so 7 more. Methuselah lived to 969.
Now, if that was in dog years, how old did he live?
I don't know. I'm not going to try and calculate it. When Lamech was 182 years old, he became the father of a son. Lamech named his son Noah, for he said, "May he bring us relief from our work and the painful labor of farming this ground that the Lord has cursed."
Let me interject. If anybody saw that movie years ago that showed Noah's best friend to be Moses, pay attention here to when Noah was born.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Noah sounds like a Hebrew term that can mean relief or comfort. All right. So after the birth of Noah, Lamech lived another 595 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Lamech lived 777 years, and then he died. Now that's pretty short. Compared to all the others, and even compared to Noah, we won't read it here, but we do know that Noah lived to be about 900 years old. Why did Lamech live such a short time? And let me just suggest here, and this is just speculation or conjecture, maybe Lamech did not die of natural causes.
Is he the one that was wounded by a man?
No. This is the same name, but it's in a different genealogy. He is not in the genealogy of Cain. He's in the genealogy of Seth.
Okay.
So it's the same name, but it's a different person.
Okay.
But it is possible that he met with a violent death of some sort, given the shortness of his years. I mean, that's...
Doctor's office and picked up a bug.
That's more than 150 years less than most of those around him. And then the closing verse of the chapter. After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, those 3 sons were not all born right on Noah's, not on the year that Noah was 500 years old. They weren't triplets, the best we can tell. So, they were born probably about a year apart, if not more. But we're kind of, I think, dealing largely in some round numbers here. So when Noah was about 500, he had these 3 sons. Now, in order to display that, I've done up a little chart here, and let me go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to have to do this, and then I'm going to switch over here to this screen so that you can see this chart. And this is a chart that has bars to show the lifetime of the various persons relative. And that red line is just the arbitrary line, whatever point it is that we say was the beginning of Adam's life. That's the red line. So I put in there the number of years from that point. That's the numbers that you see to the left of the name. The number to the right of the name is the actual age of the person at death. So you've got 0 to 930 for Adam, he lived 930 years. 130 to 1042, Seth, he lived 912 years. 235 to 1140, Enosh, he lived 905 years. 325 to 1235, Kenan, who lived 910 years. 395, that's the 70 on top of that, to 1290, Mahalalel, who lived 895 years. And you can see the bars kind of, ski jaw a little bit there. Then you have Jared, who lived from 460 to 1422. And again, that's years after whatever that arbitrary point at the red line is. He lived for 962 years. And you notice all of a sudden a pretty sizable gap there to the birth of Enoch because of how old Jared was when Enoch was born. And we show the year numbers 622 to 987 for Enoch, and we don't have his age. He was 365 when he disappeared. And you'll notice we also put that dashed arrow there to the right of it to indicate that, every year he gets a year older. If he's still alive and up in heaven with God, then every year he gets a year older. And who knows how old that is, but it's multiple thousands of years old by now. He was only 65 when Methuselah was born, so that's a short gap there. 687 to 1656, and Methuselah lived for 969 years. 874 to 1651, Lamech, who lived 777 years. And then I didn't put an age for Noah because we're not covering it as we go through this. We have 1056 to 1656, or approximately 600 years. And then I put plus because Noah didn't die at the end of that line. So that line in 1656 would be the point at which the flood came. And you'll notice that the life of Methuselah also ends at 1656. I've been told, I haven't looked it up, I can't verify this as absolutely certain, but I've been told that the name Methuselah has a meaning that when he dies, then disaster. So Methuselah's son actually died 5 years before Methuselah himself died. And when Methuselah died, then the flood. And that's where we end Noah's bar, not because he died there, but because that's where we're ending this little section here. So, get rid of that. And we can do that and switch to our other scene here. And I think here might be a good time to talk about the two-moon watery envelope theory. I've kind of hinted at that a time or two in the past. And this theory is just that. It's theory. It's speculation. We will base it a little bit on some of the evidence that's available here in the Bible. But it goes entirely beyond it, and there is no way to know for sure if this is what happened. It does also attempt to explain some of the phenomena that we find around us in the environment we live in. Now, the watery envelope theory we've talked a little bit about when we read the account of creation, because on the second day it says God separated the waters above the earth from the waters below the above the expanse from the waters below the expanse, and he created this expanse, this atmosphere around the planet, and it separated the water. And we've suggested that a watery covering around the earth would serve to even out the incoming solar radiation so that there were not cold poles and an overly heated equator on the planet, but that everything was temperate planet-wide and suitable for humans as God created them. He created them naked, so he would have had to provide them with an environment where they didn't need clothes. So that would have had to been a fairly temperate environment for them to live in. So that the water above the atmosphere would have served to do that purpose. It's just theory. We can't say for certain that's what it was. I mean, given the very brief nature of the account, we just don't have a lot of detail to work from. Now, there's also then the two-moon theory that goes along with that in fact, this planet had two moons, the two moons necessary in order to stabilize the orbit of the water above the atmosphere. And here's where the speculation is going to get really kind of wild. At some point, this theory holds, the people of this planet developed lots of technology. If most people were living upwards of 900 or more years, we believe likely that the bulk of those years an individual was full of vigor and at the peak of life powers, and that aging would have only been in effect for the last 50 or so years of that person's life. So they would have had a very long time without being retired to follow a given line of investigation, examining the world about them and how to work things and how to develop different technologies. And these could advance very quickly. And as we've seen here, we're dealing with a period of over 1,500 years for all these things to take place. So the theory then becomes that at some point they had developed rocket technology, and they had also perhaps developed nuclear technology and had developed devices of great destructive power. And the idea occurred to some of them to take out one of the two moons to see what would happen. And the version of the theory that I've heard holds that Methuselah was smart enough to know, no, that's not a good idea. You're going to cause a disaster if you try it, so don't do it. And as long as he was around, they were not permitted to do it. Once he died, there was nobody left to tell them they couldn't, and so they did it. And they struck that second moon, blew it up, and of course, if the projectile came from Earth, then it would have blown the fragments of the destroyed moon away from the Earth and out into orbit around the sun farther out, thus populating what we call the asteroid belt. Okay, a lot of speculation, kind of out there, I understand. But now that we don't have that double moon set up to maintain the orbit of the waters above the expanse, what happens? They come crashing to the Earth. And the Earth is involved in a worldwide flood. And it's only after the other events associated with that, that mountains are pushed up and land masses raise up and parts of the land get pushed way down so the water flows into the seas. And, there's an awful lot of water on this planet now. Just speculation. So, in that account, then, the flood was brought about by human activity. Well, we can't prove that. We can't say for certain that's what happened. It's just a possibility. It's speculation. So now, having yammered on about that, let's go on to the next chapter here in the book of Genesis. And let me check where we are. We've got about, I forgot to record this. This is going to be hard for my YouTube channel, but I'll figure that out later. So we've got a little over a half hour left. And this translation likes to title this, A World Gone Wrong. Then the people began to multiply on the earth. Well, we've kind of been reading about that ever since the end of chapter 3. The sons of God saw the beautiful women and took any they wanted as wives. Now, the beautiful women, in the Hebrew reads, the daughters of men, also in chapter 6, verse 4. This passage that we're reading here is subject to a number of interpretations. We'll discuss them in a moment as we read this. So they saw these women and they took any they wanted as wives. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they are only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. Now, like I say, this is a very interpretive version, and I find it interesting that they've worded verse 3 the way they have. Here's how it is in the New American Standard Bible. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. Now, by the time we reach the New Testament, the idea that this verse is predicting the time of the flood was pretty widespread. And so when Stephen, I don't remember if it was Stephen, but somebody in the New Testament mentions Noah's preaching, I think it's actually Peter, who says that he preached for 120 years. Well, that's where he would have gotten the number, but we're not going to read that explicitly. And this translation has taken the approach that I think is probably a little more rational for this, and that is God says, I'm not going to let humans continue to live for as long as they do, given the nonsense they get up to when they live that long. So in the future, we're going to arrange it so that their normal lifespan would be 120 years. Number of years.
I don't agree with that.
What?
I think it's more a case of God saying this is what's going to happen, not this is what I'm going to do.
Well, yeah, and we're going to say that about the flood as well. This is, the way we're reading it is obviously the Hebrew view. If something happened, God did it. But what I find interesting is that a number of years ago, in listening to a medical program, some of the experts got together and said that if we could eliminate all the environmental problems and the dietary problems and the things that we do to ourselves to damage ourselves, our lifespan would be approximately 120 years. I thought that was kind of fascinating, given this text. When God says that the human lifespan would be about 120 years. In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth. For whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. Now, with this verse, it may be appropriate to discuss the different interpretations that are given to these first 4 verses. One of the interpretations is that the sons of God refers to angels, and that these angels are seeing the human women and getting struck by them with lust and taking human women as wives and having children by them. And that these children, because of their angel fathers, were giants, the Nephilites, and were heroes and famous warriors because of their supposedly superior genetic background. The other interpretation is simply we're having streaming problems here. Okay, looks like we're sort of back up. That looks better. I didn't see it say we were disconnected and they were reconnecting, but we did have zero output there for a bit. The problem that I see with the sons of God being angels, we're getting disconnected again. The angel parentage or half angel parentage would explain the giants here in verse 4. Whatever is going on, I'm not going to take a position one way or the other on those. I know that Jehovah's Witnesses hold to the angels having sex with human women interpretation. You'll have to decide that for yourself based on the evidence available to you, or just decide we won't know. We can't know. We don't have enough evidence to know. The Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth, and he saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. Or I think as the King James puts it, was only evil continually. And I think it's the NIV that puts it, was only evil all the time. So the human race had, and we kind of saw that, because no sooner had the man and the woman believed the serpent's lies than that they were defending themselves and accusing each other. And within within probably less than 100 years, but around 100 years, we have the first murder taking place. And, now, we've got 100 years to the first murder. We've got 1,500 or more years, 1,600 years to go yet. And so the wickedness on the earth would have just continued to get even worse, most likely. And so, it gets to where humans didn't think anything that wasn't evil. So the Lord was sorry that he had ever made them and put them on the earth. It broke his heart. Now, I think you might be able to identify with that statement, it broke his heart. The condition of humanity broke God's heart. He was pained to see the mess that had resulted, through no fault of his own. Are you there?
Yes,
Okay.
I agreed with you.
Okay. And the Lord said, I will wipe this human race I have created from the face of the earth. Yes, and I will destroy every living thing, all the people, the large animals, the small animals that scurry along the ground, and even the birds of the sky. I am sorry I ever made them. And we're going to interject here and say that this is the Hebrew view. Even if you don't buy this idea that humans caused the flood, and that is total speculation, so we can't rely on it, it is possible that the enemy of humanity and God himself got so caught up in his own sinfulness that he imagined wiping out the human race. And maybe he even thought that if he could get away with wiping out the human race, then he could have the planet for himself, which seems to have been something that he wanted all along.
Jesus, they asked him what? I don't remember exactly, but in that story, you can see that those demons had completely lost sight of who Jesus was and what he was all about.
Yeah.
They were afraid of him.
I'm not sure how much of what you said went through because we dropped out again.
Well, you repeat it for me.
Well, I don't know what we're going to do here. We may have to call it quits because this thing just keeps dropping off on. Oh, okay. Well, we're back on momentarily there. Well, okay. So, I reset our modem. I'm not sure if that helped, but it looks like we're currently sort of streaming. We'll cross our fingers and go on. Do you remember what you were saying, or are you even still there? Hello.
Hi.
Okay. I said something and it blanked you out, so we didn't hear you.
I said, you even lost me. The phone disconnected.
Oh, well, okay, yeah, because it has to have an internet connection. Yeah. And I reset the modem so it didn't have an internet connection. Plus, I don't think we had one because I went in there and refreshed the page on the browser on my other computer and I got you're not on the internet message.
But I checked my computer. I was on the internet.
Yeah. Well, you had to been off for some of the time because I reset the modem. So while it was resetting, you didn't have a connection. But it looks like we're up for now. So, did you want to finish what you were saying, or try it again? Because it may not have gotten across with all the connection problems we were having.
I don't remember something about pigs.
Well, you were talking about when Jesus cast out the demons and they went into the pigs. That demonstrated that they had lost all sense of
What God was all about.
yeah.
They were afraid.
They were afraid of Jesus. Yes, that's true.
But I don't remember why we're saying that.
Well, we were talking about the possibility that the flood was a result of the action of the archangel Lucifer, known to us as Satan or the serpent, who thought maybe if he could wipe out life on the planet with some action like the flood, that he could then gain control of the planet from God, who'd taken it from him when he created it and set it up for humans. So the Hebrew version that we're reading here says God was angry with humanity. Well, it did break his heart, and on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. That's verse 7 in the King James. In the New American Standard Bible, it says, And the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. But the important verse, and let's scroll down here so we can see it. Where'd my cursor go? There we go. Is verse 8. But Noah found favor with the Lord. And you would have to come up with something along that nature of an interpretation if from the Hebrew viewpoint you're saying, well, the flood happened, therefore God did it. So we're going to suggest that God got upset with humanity because of the wickedness on the earth. And somehow Noah got word. Yeah, I don't know why it keeps dumping us off like that. We're about done here, so I think we need to quit and quit trying to work our way through all this um, glitchy connection. If God knew what was going on, then he says, I am not ready to give up on the human race. I still intend to redeem the human race. And I picked Noah. We don't know why he picked Noah. It doesn't tell.
The underdog. Because those are the ones he can work with.
Well, I think what we're going to have to do here is give up on this, because our connection is worthless, and I don't know what's going on, but we'll just have to try this again another time. Besides, it is time for us to be quitting, and we don't. Come on, we don't have a connection right now anyway. Yeah, well, there we do. So. Yeah, we can talk about that. We'll pick up here at verse 9 next.